Funding for this episode comes from a grant from the Rias Berlin Commission, connecting journalists across Germany and the U.S. since 1992.
Welcome to More to Know, a podcast to explore beyond the headlines. In every episode, we'll take a look at a topic and bring together different voices on the subject who are experts or directly involved. We'll talk about what's in the news, science, technology, some sports, and just things that have more to know. We'll bring you a new episode every 2 weeks, so make sure to like and subscribe. I'm your host, Christopher Conover. In this episode, more to know about beer. And it turns out there's so much to know, but specifically we're going to look at the history and the future of the beverage. When it comes to beer, big gatherings are part of the tradition and experience. Be it having a cold one while cheering on your favorite team at the stadium, or raising a Moss, the 1-liter glass Steins at Oktoberfest in Munich, one of the quintessential beer festivals in the world. The first Oktoberfest was not a beer festival. It wasn't even called Oktoberfest. It was a 5-day celebration of the wedding of the Prince of Bavaria in October of 1810. A year later, people wanted to celebrate again, and a tradition and a festival were born. Now millions of people a year attend Oktoberfest in Munich to sing a chorus of Ein Prosit and raise their mugs. The beer is special, made for the festival, and only 6 Munich breweries are allowed to serve at Oktoberfest. The newest of those breweries is Paulaner, which was founded by monks in the 1600s. Even though they're the youngest brewer at Oktoberfest, they serve the most beer. Paulaner is now an international brand, so to learn more about people's taste in beer, we spoke with Markus Thieme. He's the director of international markets for Paulaner.
We are currently in 82 countries distributed, and wherever you go in these countries, we're quite happy and surprised in a positive way how much they know about Paulaner, and especially not just that it's a beer, also this connection with Oktoberfest, this connection with Bavaria, this tradition of brewing beer is something which they tell us and their experiences, because at the end of the day, beer is a huge category, and there's a lot of great beer around the world, a lot of great beer brands around the world. So you have to differentiate from these with experiences and with kind of brand love.
Certainly Germany is a big part of the beer tradition, with breweries there dating back to the 1300s. But there's more to international beer than Germany.
Yesterday I was in China, and we had a session IPA. Or an hazy IPA. Some people had an hazy IPA, and that's something that's not so far away from, for example, our wheat beer. So from a style, it's actually helping us to also explain consumers around the world in which category we sit, and if they don't know our beer but maybe have been introduced to craft beer, you can build a bridge between the different beer categories.
It's interesting you mentioned China. I don't think people think of China as a big beer market, but I guess if you're over there, it's at least a growing market.
It's the biggest beer market in the world, and it's incredible how much beer is consumed, and how experienced they are. And we're happy that it's becoming one of our biggest markets for us, and it's super relevant. And it's mainly wheat beer, and that's interesting, right? We all know lagers dominating the world, and in China, I think 95% is lager, but our by far major beer style, which we're growing quite remarkably, is wheat beer.
As Markus said, in China, the market is sweet beer. And in the US, we have lots of IPAs. So to remain competitive, a brand like Paulaner has to learn what works in every market and not just flood the taps with one thing.
We just had a process, or kind of a development of the international strategy, and we thought, okay, what is our USP of Polana? And one big USP is that we can play the whole portfolio under one brand roof, and consumers believe in this. So they trust the quality if they may be wheat beer consumer, but they also find to kind of walk through our portfolio and try it out. And we clearly, our aim is clearly to position this portfolio in the right way. It's not that we enter every single market with a whole portfolio. There's a clear focus on wheat beer. And actually, it's surprising for some players in the market that we start with wheat beer and they say, oh, it's quite a heavy beer in terms of taste and maybe also alcohol. But it's also where you define your way in. You know, the lager market is very competitive. There are many lagers out there, and you have to make sure when you enter a market or when you focus your growth strategy in the market that you differentiate with your, let's say, 3 year strategy, and not just come with a whole shop and portfolio into a market, and then consumers get totally confused. And that's where we, from a focus perspective, that's how we enter, and that is also then step by step how we build the different brands with the let's say within the market.
When it comes to brewing beer, Germany has very strict purity laws. That makes the beer good, but also can pose some challenges for export and expanding international markets.
We are brewing in Germany with a couple of exceptions, which are called brew houses. And these brew houses are in China and in Kazakhstan and in Azerbaijan. That was a strategic approach a couple of years ago, and they brew small batches just for their locations, but not outside of it. And it's a mix of they're selling our beer, which is brewed in Munich, and they're selling some beers which are brewed in their locations. But in general, I think even that's a USP that we focus on imported, and you cannot imagine how many countries are asking us, can we not brew here? And we clearly see also from a pricing perspective that we can position our beer in a super premium pricing section, which is still growing compared, for example, to mainstream. And people maybe drink less, but they drink better. And if they decide to spend money for beer, they go rather for a premium, super premium beer or product than for an everyday one.
In the US, very often the beer drinker who is less casual turns to local breweries and craft beers. Marcus says in the eyes of Paulaner, that's a good thing.
If you look at beer in general, and craft is an essential development in the last couple of years around the world. Definitely helped the category to discover new styles, to discover that even with the Reinheitsgebot, you can use, even in this frame, you can use different hops, and especially US, with so many different new hops, you can create great beers. I would even say that people in the US, and I lived in the US and also worked for a US craft brewer, and before I joined Paulaner, Paulaner with its tradition, although it's kind of a big company compared to some other German ones, but compared to some big players, global players were quite small, is seen as a craft to a certain extent because of the tradition and still made in Germany, and not just brew wherever you are around the world and give it to the consumer wherever it's possible. So therefore, we still are kind of in this niche. I think from another perspective, the opportunity that people can discover different flavors in the beer category is actually helping us.
That was Marcus Thieme, the Director of International Markets for Munich's Paulaner Brewing. Paulaner, as he says, is a global brand, but at its heart is the beer garden, a place where everybody, no matter who they are, can go have a beer, some conversation, and relax.
Also a black water.
So now we turn to your local. Maybe it's a craft brewery, maybe it's a traditional bar, or maybe it's more of a beer garden. For me, it's the Tucson Hop Shop, a neighborhood gathering spot that is more on the beer garden model with nearly 24 craft beers on tap and more offerings in the bottle shop. We recently sat down and had a beer with the co-owner, David Zuckerman, on a quiet weekday afternoon. The Hop Shop recently celebrated 10 years in business, and David says in that time, beer tastes have changed.
Trends come and go. When we started, sour beer, wild ales, those were kind of the up-and-coming trend that was really just starting to hit at that point. And we've seen that, peak and then fall off. Hazy IPAs didn't exist 10 years ago, really. We've seen those, hit and those stuck. That's a viable style now. You see different drinking patterns amongst our customers. IPAs are always going to be the biggest hit on the market, but I've had breweries reach out to me and say, hey, we've really been focusing on hazy IPAs, and we're seeing a lot of customers lean more towards West Coast styles, and that's crazy. And my response is always like, oh, that's been for the last 8 months or whatever, however long it's been, because the nice thing about this place is we are right on the front lines of those trends, so we get to see all of that happen before the producers, before the distributors, which is great to see, and also can make it difficult to really acquire those styles and the numbers that we're selling them at sometimes.
If you've been out for drinks lately, you've probably noticed a new trend, NA or non-alcoholic drinks. Maybe it's a fancy mocktail on the menu, or the growing number of NA beers, including one from Paul Anner. David says the non-alcoholic trend is an interesting one to watch from the standpoint of a bar owner.
I feel like 2 or 3 years ago, the whole dry January was really a big thing. We would watch a lot of our customers go, okay, it's January, we're doing dry January, and they were all pretty faithful to it. And then last year, it started to be like dry January for the first 2 weeks, and then people would come in and they'd have an NA, and then friends would come meet them and they'd have another one, and then they'd be like, okay, I'm ready for a real beer, and they'd have, an alcoholic beer. And this year, it just seems like there's been a lot less talk about it. And I know in the media, it's like a big conversation thing about how non-alcoholics are really on the uptick, and there definitely are. I mean, when we opened, there were no viable NA options. There were, but there were none that I felt good about bringing in here as far as the quality and the things I expected from a product at that time. And so it's been great that, Arizona Wilderness has been making NAs, Mother Road makes NAs now, Sierra Nevada, Deschutes, Athletic has been great. They're a front runner for sure. And they've been selling very, very well for us. There's some NA ciders, which, are interesting, and wrapping your mind around how it's not just sparkling apple juice. But, it works. And I think that there will always be a place for it now, but I don't know that it's going to necessarily overshadow beer or cider or wine.
While global brands are trying to expand their footprints, in the U.S. there's been a bit of a contraction of the market, especially in the craft or local brewery category.
When we opened in 2015, there was something like 4,200 to 4,400 breweries in the U.S. as per the National Brewers Guild. Last year, I want to say it topped out around 9,900 or 10,000 breweries, something around there. We've seen decline in the last couple of years of breweries closing, which you never want to see anything close. But also, to speak to that saturation, that's what that points to me, is market saturation. And that leads to some inevitable shrinkage. I mean, some people do it well, some people don't, and some people are just victims of, you know, too many choices, and theirs fall off a little bit. There's a brewery in California called Casa Agria, which is closing, which is one of my personal favorites. They make great beer, but, you know, it's just a tough market, and, you know, the economic climate makes it really hard. The fact that it's such a crowded market, drinking trends, what people want to drink are it's always kind of flowing between beer, wine, and spirits, and so beer has been in the forefront for a long time, and that never stays that way. I mean, it's been probably longer than it normally would be, but I think craft beer is, at least from my perspective, is really held pretty true. Like, people like drinking a beer. It's a social event. I mean, for us here, we're a community gathering point that also serves beer, and, you know, people want to come here for the ambiance of the place and have a beer with their friends, and that's a nice thing.
Politics may want to make you have a cold one, but it also affects what we can drink and how much it costs.
Yes, definitely seen a difference in the pricing with tariffs. I mean, all European beers have gone up a ton. I think, like, we carry St. Bernardus. We've had that in draft. The kegs, the half barrels of those went up over $100 just in the last 3 months. They've become some of the most expensive kegs that I've ever purchased. The Belgian beer in cans and bottles is also becoming more and more expensive, and so that's a hard thing. You know, I know a lot of the aluminum cans that are so prevalent for packaged beer now are made with Canadian aluminum, and so that tariff is starting to build itself into the pricing that we're seeing, and it is, you know, every little bit is an uptick, so it just makes it a little bit more expensive than, you know, maybe it was a year or two ago.
And David says customers do notice the price change.
I think that the great thing about the range of people that come and frequent Tucson Hop Shop is that some of them are very price conscious, and we have options for that, and some of them want what they want and they don't really care what it costs. I mean, to me, there's, within reason, you know, I think everybody has in their mind what something should cost and what that value is to them, and if it's beyond what that value is, they're not going to see why they should spend their money on that. So, you know, if a 10 ounce of St. Bernardus is $13 and somebody's like, I don't even really like that style of beer, I wanted to try a Belgian beer, but that's way too much money for me, that's fine. You know, hopefully we can find some alternative for them. Like, New Belgium in Colorado makes a lot of those styles of Belgian, double, a triple, and they're much more affordable because they're not subject to those tariffs exactly.
That was David Zuckerman, co-owner of the Tucson Hop Shop. So we know tariffs hit the cost for imported beer, but what about beers made in the U.S.? Friend of More to Know, Zach Ziegler, who works at KLCC Public Radio in Eugene, Oregon, recently spoke with Jamie Floyd, the co-founder of Ninkasi Brewing in that city, and the effect of tariffs came up.
The tariff situation is just finally starting to hit. Most manufacturers were trying to buffer prices for as long as they could, and so those situations are changing, and so some of our cost of goods have certainly gone up. As well as the supply chain, the whole West Coast has been working through a CO2 shortage. Every year, the CO2 companies do some work on their facilities, and then one other one also closed down for a temporary time. That put a huge amount of stress, not just on our industry, but anyone that utilizes CO2 on the West Coast. So there's kind of a situation in which there's always a lot of hard work going on here. That's sort of on the harder side of things. The thing that I would say about Oregon beer is it's some of the best in the country. We're really blessed to have ingredients grown here locally, including hops. It's been a long tradition for brewing. And Oregon breweries are also some of the most awarded in terms of national and international competitions. Oregon brewers always prove to show their expertise. And then, most importantly, we're local businesses. And so I think the most important thing for Oregon is an important time for Oregonians to choose Oregon products as much as they can. And all of the things that when people go and buy Oregon beer, all of that money is staying here in the state and goes to help support families that have, real meaningful wages as well as benefits. Yeah, we're up here 37 feet above 550 barrel fermenter, looking down on our canning machine.
Looking around here, I'm seeing a lot of steel, a lot of aluminum. You mentioned earlier, tariffs are finally starting to catch up with the industry. What's the impact that has on beer making today?
It has a lot of impacts. The aluminum can situation, or aluminum as a whole, all of that tariff association is really just starting to happen. A lot of people had contracts in place ahead of time, but as those contracts expire, they're not going to honor those prices, and in some points have already changed those pricings based on their own personal demand and ability to supply. Certainly manufacturers, some brewing manufacturing, given how old brewing is, it comes from Germany and other places internationally. Access to those materials, of course, is skyrocketing. Quite a few maltsters, places that we buy malt from, are international, and even the U.S. malt crop. Most of the companies that grow barley in the United States also grow in Canada, so it's kind of an over-connected situation there as well. And the same goes with hops. So most of the inputs do have some international ability, which is that way. Fortunately for the United States, we do have a lot of it inside. What used to happen in brewing 15, 20 years ago is that most of the inputs for cost of goods in all our businesses are commodities, and they used to all go up and down at different times. So steel might be up, which usually if steel's up, energy's up, but then maybe other things like malt or hops or things are down. And it used to create an environment of balance where if something was up, other things were kind of giving you a break. Certainly since COVID, we've only seen prices go up with really no downward pressure, regardless of normal business sort of trade.
That was Zach Ziegler talking with Jamie Floyd, the co-founder of Ninkasi Brewing in Eugene, Oregon. To hear their full conversation, check out the Oregon Rainmakers podcast on the KLCC website. And that's it for this episode of More to Know. Make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks to Lane Lucky for our sound of the Signia Vine Prosit at Oktoberfest in Munich. Maybe we'll see you there this year, Lane. TJ Spiker produced this episode, and our music is by Enter the Haggis. I'm Christopher Conover. Prost, cheers, thanks for joining us.
Funding for this episode comes from a grant from the Rias Berlin Commission, connecting journalists across Germany and the U.S. since 1992.